God says, "Listen closely, my beloved soul." This promise is not spoken in passing, and it is not offered only for moments when life feels easy. It is spoken for the quiet hours, the uncertain days, the moments when your heart feels tired even though you keep going. This promise is steady, unchanging, and deeply personal. I will never leave you, not when you feel strong, and not when you feel unsure, not when you are confident, and not when you are questioning everything. There were times when you felt alone even while surrounded by people. Times when your struggles felt invisible, when your effort felt unnoticed, when your prayers felt unanswered. God says those moments did not mean absence. They meant closeness in a form you had not yet learned to recognize. I was present in your endurance, in your patience, in the strength that carried you forward when you thought you had none left. You may not always feel divine presence in dramatic ways. Often it appears as quiet reassurance, as resilience you did not plan, as calm that arrives without explanation. God says that calm has been my promise working silently within you. Even when you questioned direction, even when you felt uncertain about timing, you were never walking alone. Think about how many times you made it through something you once thought would break you. Think about how often clarity arrived after confusion, how peace followed struggle, how understanding grew with time. God says that pattern is not coincidence. It is proof of guidance that never stepped away, even when you could not see it clearly. This promise is not conditional. It does not depend on perfection, strength, or constant faith. It remains during doubt as much as during belief. God says you do not need to hold on tightly out of fear. You are already held. That is why you are here now, able to pause, able to listen, able to receive reassurance instead of striving for it. As this message begins, allow it to settle without resistance. You do not need to analyze it or measure it. Simply let it remind you of something your soul already knows but sometimes forgets in the noise of life. You are not abandoned. You are not unseen. You are not navigating this journey alone. Stay with this message. It is unfolding gently, layer by layer, just as this promise unfolds across your life. The next part will take you deeper into understanding how this promise has been active even in moments you once thought were silent. God says, "Let this truth settle deeper now, beyond the surface of words and into the places where you once felt unsure." This promise has not been following you from a distance, it has been walking beside you through every season, adjusting its pace to yours, never rushing ahead, never falling behind. Even when you felt like life was moving without direction, there was a steady presence keeping you aligned, gently redirecting you when you could not see the turn coming. There were moments when you believed you had to handle everything alone, moments when asking for help felt like weakness, moments when silence felt like abandonment. God says those moments were not evidence of distance, they were invitations to grow into trust. I stayed while you learned how to carry responsibility, while you learned discernment, while you learned how to listen inwardly instead of constantly looking outward for reassurance. My presence did not disappear, it became quieter so you could hear your own strength developing. You may now recognize that some of the hardest moments shaped you in ways comfort never could. They taught you patience, discernment, and empathy. God says I was present in those lessons, not removing difficulty, but guiding you through it so it would not harden your heart. Every challenge you faced with honesty became a place where my promise anchored you. Even when you were not aware of it at the time. Notice how your awareness has changed. You no longer measure life only by outcomes. You notice process. You notice growth. You notice how your responses have softened and matured. God says this awareness is not accidental. It comes from walking with guidance over time. You were not left to figure things out alone, you were allowed to learn at your own pace, supported even in uncertainty. This promise also means that you are never navigating change without support. When something ends, something else is quietly being prepared. When one door closes, clarity is already forming for the next step. God says you are not asked to know everything in advance. You are asked to trust that presence does not disappear just because circumstances shift. I remain constant even when life changes shape. There is comfort meant for you here. Not dramatic comfort, but steady reassurance. The kind that stays with you after the message ends. God says you do not need to fear sudden loss of guidance. You do not need to worry about being forgotten or overlooked. What is meant to remain will remain. What is meant to unfold will do so in time, without force. As you continue with this message, allow yourself to release the habit of bracing for absence. You are not waiting to be left. You are learning how to walk with awareness of presence. That awareness changes how you experience everything else. It brings calm into decision-making. It brings patience into waiting. It brings strength into moments that once felt overwhelming. Stay with this truth as it settles. This promise has been active longer than you realize, and it continues beyond this moment. The next part will help you see how this promise shapes the future gently, without pressure, and why you are more supported than you have ever been aware of. God says, now understand this promise in a deeper way, not as something spoken only to comfort you, but as something that has actively shaped your life without you realizing it. I was there in moments when you almost gave up but chose to take one more step. I was there when your strength surprised even you. I was there when you made decisions that later protected you from outcomes you could not yet see. This promise has been living, moving, guiding, and guarding, even when you thought you were walking alone. There were crossroads where you hesitated, unsure which direction to take, afraid of making the wrong choice. God says those pauses were not failures, they were moments where wisdom was being formed. I did not abandon you at those crossroads. I stood with you, allowing clarity to arrive slowly so it would last. Some paths you did not take were not missed opportunities, they were protection disguised as uncertainty. You may now see that certain delays saved you from rushing into things that would have cost you peace. Certain endings spared you from attachments that would have drained you. God says my promise was present in every redirection. Even when something did not work out the way you hoped, it worked out in a way that preserved your future. That is not absence. That is careful presence. Notice how your inner voice has become steadier over time. You no longer react as quickly. You reflect. You weigh. You sense when something feels right or wrong. God says this discernment did not come from isolation, it came from walking with guidance long enough to recognize truth quietly instead of loudly. My promise has been teaching you how to trust your inner knowing. There were moments when you felt tired of being strong, tired of holding things together, tired of being the one who understands while others do not. God says I never asked you to carry everything alone. Even when you felt exhausted, strength was being renewed in ways you could not measure. That renewal did not always feel like relief. Sometimes it felt like endurance. But endurance carried you forward when comfort could not. This promise also lives in the way your heart has remained open despite disappointment. You could have closed off. You could have grown bitter. You could have stopped believing in goodness altogether. Yet you did not. God says that openness is evidence of presence. Something kept you soft when hardness would have been easier. Something kept you hopeful when giving up would have required less effort. As you remain with this message, recognize that this promise does not end at reassurance. It continues as guidance into what comes next. You are not being led blindly. You are being led gently, with respect for your growth and your pace. God says you are more supported now than you were when you first started this journey, not because you were weaker then, but because you are ready now to recognize support without fear. Stay with this understanding. Let it settle fully. The final part will bring this promise into the present moment clearly and show how it continues to hold you steady as your life unfolds from here. God says, let this promise rest fully in your heart now, not as a thought you visit for comfort, but as a truth you live from every day. I will never leave you does not mean life will always be easy, but it means you will never face anything without support, guidance, and purpose quietly working beneath the surface. You are not walking ahead hoping I will follow. I have already gone before you, and I remain beside you still. There will be days ahead when you feel strong and clear, and there will be days when you feel tired without knowing why. God says my presence does not fluctuate with your energy. When you feel steady, I walk with you. When you feel weary, I carry more than you realize. You are not required to be consistent for this promise to remain true. It is not powered by your effort. It is sustained by my faithfulness. Understand this deeply now, nothing you are becoming is happening alone. Every moment of growth, every shift in perspective, every quiet realization has been accompanied by guidance shaping you gently. God says I do not rush your healing, and I do not pressure your progress. I honor the pace of your heart. That is why what unfolds in your life may feel slow at times, but it will feel solid, stable, and lasting. You may notice that you are less afraid of the unknown now. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you trust that answers will come when they are needed. God says this is what it looks like when a promise has taken root. Fear no longer leads. Trust does. You still think, plan, and care, but you do not panic the way you once did. That is not coincidence. That is the fruit of knowing you are not alone. As you move forward from this moment, carry this truth gently with you. When doubt whispers, remember this promise. When silence feels heavy, remember this promise. When change arrives unexpectedly, remember this promise. God says you do not need to chase reassurance anymore. You are already anchored. You are already accompanied. You are already held. This message is not meant to end here. It is meant to stay with you, to surface when you need calm, to remind you of steadiness when life feels uncertain. My promise to you does not fade after the message ends. It continues in the quiet moments, the ordinary days, the unseen choices that shape your future. If this message brought peace to your heart, take a moment and acknowledge it. You may gently affirm it by commenting, "Amen," or "I receive," not for anyone else, but as a reminder to yourself that you are open and trusting. If you feel this promise could comfort someone else who may need reassurance, you can share it so it reaches them at the right time. And if you wish to continue receiving messages that bring calm, faith, and grounding, stay connected and subscribe so you miss what is meant to reach you next. God says, remember this always, wherever you go, whatever you face, however life unfolds, I will never leave you.